What's going on, Mo? It's your boy DameSmiff, and this evening we're gonna have a quick little opinion breakdown on a lyric that I've heard. And if you enjoy conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button because that will let more people find this video, and hit the subscribe button so that way you can catch my latest videos and uploads. So the lyric we're breaking down is actually half of a bar from Pusha T, and it actually represents um a little bit of how I feel about the music industry, but it also challenged me when I heard it to kind of think about what it really means considering the current events of this bar. And what it is a trapper turned rapper can turn into Puff. And what he means is that a trapper or a hustler can turn into a rapper, meaning a musician or a music entertainer, and he can also turn himself from that position into a music mogul like Puff Daddy, the Diddler. And so when I first heard this bar, it came out years ago, and I first heard it, when the album dropped by Pusha T, and it was hard, and I was like, oh shit, that's tight. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, you could take the hustler's mentality and take his work ethic, and he'd be in the streets putting in extra overtime hours. That's more than the other lower level hustlers. He's better than them. And then he's working different businesses and relationships and networking. He's a super. He's got two phones. He's lit. And so I started to really think about, like, okay, that makes sense. But then the Puff bar part of the bar came up, and I was like, damn, there is a consideration about, like, what type of person we're using as an example here. And it would kind of like be foolish of us not to consider knowing what we know so far, or at least considering the allegations on Mr. Diddler. But I think what I'm going to try to do is I'm not going to try to pass judgment, but I'm going to try to consider certain characteristics that we may find common in entertainment and people in positions like this. So again, when we're talking about a trapper, this is another word we use to soften the blow because really it comes a lot of slang in the hood and poverty and things like that comes from people literally trying to hide things. Like, we're literally trying to cover and coat things and shatter. And the reason we do that is because often the things we're talking about are of the criminal element or breaking a law. So we don't have a code word for vegetables. We all know the word veggies, vegetables, and we don't have a code word for family time. We might say chilling, but that's not really a code word for specifically spending time with your family. So when we think of things like, let's say, taking things we don't own, we have words like jugging, stuff like that. So we have words for things that are not necessarily on the up and up or high integral activities. And so when we consider the word trapper, I use the word hustler because I'm a positive person. So I was able to pull some positive vocabulary out of here. But more commonly contributed to this word is the criminal element of people selling illicit items and substances and things like that, right? So this person isn't necessarily commonly considered a good person. You may hear stuff like people using this word to apply it to maybe a cultural element of the thing they do in their normal 9 to 5, right? So you might see things like the uh, investment trapper. You might see I'm trapping out of my food truck selling these plates. You might hear stuff like that, right? And that's just us common folk trying to be hip and mainstream. But the issue that comes along with this is just like the other video that I was talking about where people want to be shooters and not thinkers. There is a consideration of what we really mean when we say this. So a lot of people, they'll say I'm trapping and they just mean I'm working hard. But the real word has nothing to do with how hard you're working. So what characteristics of a person would be a trapper, would hustle whatever they come across to make a quick dollar. Well, I, just like many of you, learned the word through hip hop and kind of started to feel the word throughout my community become more and more popular, and then started to actually see the true application of the word in real life, right? And so what I've realized is that most people start off hustlers. Most people start off like, I'm going to make money, do a good thing, sell my stuff, make a change in the community or just my household. Maybe you just got bills to pay. But then eventually there comes a point to where their character gets challenged. So you may run into a thief or somebody who tries to strong arm you, and you have to consider fight or flight. You may come into a position of extreme opportunity with high risk. So you have to make the decision on your integrity and honor and, where you stand on your discipline. But this is just me laying out the reality that what I believed to be a trapper was completely wrong, because I only chose one or the other. Meaning I only chose that if you were a trapper, you would just sell, things that help the community, and you would be honorable and you wouldn't cut corners. All your prices would be fair. You would be lenient on people who may have been good customers. I was thinking that about the trapper, but that's not true. The trapper has the option to extort you, to apply violence, to also kind of scheme and manipulate you. And in an instance, I could mean a variety of things, but I'll give you a few examples. Like, you could be a trapper selling, let's say, pills, but you want to sell and make a certain amount of money. But because you live in a certain area, your demographic is working elderly people. So you're selling illicit items to older elderly people for you to pay your bills. Now, logically and pragmatically, you're like, all right, this makes sense. There's a need. I have a supply, and then boom, business, right? But the issue that comes along with this is now, just like most businesses, you have to realize that, okay, there's a consequence with people using my product. And there is a consequence with people misusing my product. Who's responsible? And what happens when it occurs, when someone actually misuses my product? So if, let's say, you're, in this example, and someone winds up passing or overdosing, you as the trapper, still have the option to continue to be a trapper. But if you wanted to be Puff, do you think it would make sense for you to act like a bad person in this moment, or to be an upright person? Because you want to be Puff. And that's the point of the lyric. A trapper turned rapper can turn into Puff. And what Puff represents, as far as the music industry at a point, was almost excellence, kind of in a sense of like a lot of successful business, a lot of networking, a lot of notoriety, and as well as opportunity laid in front of you. So many people wanted to be in that position. But what did it take to get there? And just like I said earlier, I as well thought that it took integrity, honor, and you had to be consistent in that and disciplined in that. But then it got me to consider, well, then maybe this position is not the one I want to be in if it doesn't take honor and integrity to be there. So that's why I thought this line was kind of interesting, because it got me to thinking about like Puff's actual outcomes for the things he's done in his past. Now, the reason I'm trying to be kind of gentle about the topic, because he hasn't officially been like convicted of anything. These are allegations, and they're not even like clear allegations. But the thing I've noticed that is consistent is that not many people have nice things to say about one of the greatest music moguls we have. So it does mean something to say that this line kind of translate into a trapper turned rapper can turn into Puff. At least that's what this rapper, this artist believes, So what do you think? Do you think the characteristics line up between being a successful trapper, a hustler, and things like that, In reality sense, not maybe what you believe it to be, but in reality sense, do you think the characteristics line up to where you need to be a savage, you need to be cutthroat, you need to be able to be a warrior in the garden? Let me know in the comments, what do you think? And I will see you guys tomorrow at another episode of A Late Night at Dames.